Former White House press secretary and current MSNBC analyst Jen Psaki slammed her political adversaries, I think that's what we call a Psaki bomb, for spreading misleading and inaccurate information. Let's watch.
First of all, I mean, I don't think it's a shock to me, or wasn't a shock to me, that they were sharing inaccurate information. I mean, we know that with our own eyes, right?
Right. But not only that, but they were giving accurate information and then asking for it to be withdrawn because they were afraid of their audience.
Well, that, but also they were knowingly sharing this inaccurate information. I mean, I had about 20 seconds where I thought, Tucker Carlson, maybe he's one of us. And then, like, by second 21, I thought, wait, he is intentionally sharing disinformation with his audiences and treating them like they are stupid, frankly, so that he can save his job, save viewers, and make money. That's the part that's the most horrifying to me. I am horrified by the disinformation, but the fact that they knowingly did it, that is what I think is, in my view, the most problematic.
Okay, go ahead. You go ahead.
Well, look, fair enough. This is not a good look, as they say, for Fox. Fox is getting a lot of criticism for the gap between what it seems like people felt privately and what was said on air. Again, I think it's a little bit more thorny than that because it was the guest saying it, in many cases not the host, but did the host push back enough? Fine, they're getting criticism for that. I think that's all fair. I think this is a clean hit. Fine. But I do have a little bit of a hair trigger now for this everything is disinformation framing that is very concerning to me because more than, you know, people on Fox saying things that I think are wrong, whatever, that's their First Amendment free speech right. Not if it's libelous, that's what's being adjudicated, et cetera. But people in Jen Psaki's position, you know, in her role as White House press secretary, her and other Biden administration officials said that everything was disinformation, and if social media was not taking greater steps to address this, they were going to be undermining democracy and harming public health. And because of that framing, there was a vast censorship of things that you ought to be able to say. So I wish we could get away from the disinformation, misinformation, malinformation framing on everything. I think it is just very toxic and very wrong-headed because it also stems from a lot of faulty assumptions about what these things even are, because a lot of what they're complaining about is, oh, you actually got to read Hillary Clinton's emails. That's disinformation. No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's truthful information.
Yeah. So I think that you're right that the term misinformation has become just about as useful as the term woke.
Yeah.
Insofar as people just apply it to whatever they don't like, and it's not a very useful guiding principle or word that helps us understand at all what people are talking about.
That's actually a pretty good comparison. No one will agree with it because everybody's mad about one thing or the other, but I think that's a pretty good analogy.
All right. So that being said, I do think this, in your words, is a clean hit. You know, Jen Psaki is really focusing in not on the nature of what Fox News was talking about. I think we've kind of all run that into the ground. You know, election denialism, 1-6, blah, 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 all of that stuff. But what she's really focusing on here in this clip is the fact that there was this public versus private persona here. That behind the scenes, Fox News hosts were saying, we think having to validate Trump's narrative is wild. We're irritated that we have to, but we know we have to because we're feeling competition from news programs like news channels like Newsmax, that there is this fear that they're going to lose market share to people who are more conservative, more to the right, more radical, and more willing to be kind of unequivocally Trump boosting. And that's why you get these moments where, you know, Tucker Carlson is saying you need to fire Jackie Heinrich for publicly pushing back against election denialism, not because Tucker Carlson believes in election denialism, but because he knows that it's bad for Fox's bottom line. And there's like three layers of that, right? I know better. I want to change. I want to say something different, but also I'm going to actively critique people who are saying the right thing because I'm looking out for the best financial interest of this company. And I got to agree with Jen Psaki that is not especially respectful to the Fox News audience.
Well, and also it doesn't work to be insincere. Like, you can want to tell your audience exactly what they want to hear, but if you don't believe it yourself, it just doesn't work. It comes across as inauthentic. It's not persuasive. Like, you have to really believe. I mean, I think a lot of these hosts on Newsmax and people like Matt Walsh, I think he says what he actually thinks. I don't agree with everything he thinks, but I think he believes it enough. Because it would be too exhausting if you didn't actually believe in what you were doing. And I think that's true of a lot of figures who are successful on both sides of the aisle.
But it's not true. at least in the context of some of these Trumpy theories.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Carlson,
Eventually they did turn around and push back on what Sidney Powell was saying because they didn't buy it. And you can only pretend to buy it for so long.
Right, but even now, I mean, there is a kind of a soft shoe that's going on. We talked about this earlier this week, whether or not the fact that Tucker Carlson invited Ron DeSantis to give his foreign policy perspective on the war in Ukraine was an effort for Tucker Carlson to kind of boost. We were just, hypothesizing whether or not it was an effort to present to his audience that Ron DeSantis is also a guy who's anti-interventionist, and this is a viable option here. And there was that kind of very lengthy, detailed, I think, New York Times piece last summer that talked about the fact that Tucker Carlson's central insight is that Trumpism is a winning philosophy and like a winning recipe to sell to the public, something that is very, very popular, even if Trump himself is not as popular as he used to be. And you can kind of read the tea leaves of Tucker Carlson trying to disentangle Trump from Trumpism and to continue to sell the latter while abandoning the former.
Fine, but I think it's perfectly justifiable to ask that question what are your Ukraine views?
No, of course, it's good, it's relevant.
And I'm glad to know what DeSantis has to say about it. Again, as it signals that he's in touch with what the base and what I think a lot of American people whose voices are not being heard on this issue.
Sure, but Robby, is it going to be, are we going to trust, if we think that there is any kind of political incentive to Tucker Carlson doing this, are we going to trust Tucker Carlson, for example, to bring scrutiny to that statement the way that he would if, say, Nikki Haley or one of these other kind of traditional conservatives who 5 years ago were talking about how we needed to send missiles X, Y, and Z and how we needed to start a war with X, Y, and Z person.
When Trump veered in a hawk direction and took out Soleimani, the only criticism he didn't get criticism from anyone in the media. But because the mainstream media was cheering. They're like, is this the day he finally became president? Yeah. They love this stuff. The only person who said, wait, was this a good idea? Was Tucker Carlson.
I mean, I think that's completely
tried
fair.
To check when Trump went against his bad foreign policy, when Trump's good foreign policy impulses were overcome by the tremendous bipartisan pressure to do something.
I think
Tucker chucked him.
That's fair, but we did not see that, or we have not seen that so far. That same scrutiny applied to Ron DeSantis' past statements that were of a much more hawkish nature.
Yeah, look, I don't want to carry water for him. I think it's important to note that he was previously very hawkish, like everybody else, on Ukraine.
And here's the thing.
Totally
At
fine.
any point is there going to be accountability, because the conservative media is not covering the Dominion lawsuit story at all. It's not, and with obvious reason. I mean, maybe Newsmax is, but Fox News is.
Actually, Fox did address it finally on.
What did they say?
I was on. So Howard Kurtz, who has the 11 a.m. kind of media buzz show on Fox. Previously, he had mentioned that he wanted to address it, but they told him he couldn't address it, so he was not addressing it. But
which is a big tell.
He did address it over the weekend. I was actually on immediately following him with Amisha Cross, who's occasionally been a co-host of ours. We were on like the right person versus Democrat person panel immediately following it, so we got to watch it from the green room. I thought Howie did a great job. I like him. He did a great job of laying out the relevant facts of the case, and he made the argument that, look, at the end of the day, no matter what you think, this should be considered a First Amendment case. You may disagree with what the Fox people said, but it's important to have the right to do that.
There's a Dominion case, and then there's what it means about Fox News knowingly having hosts that disagreed with the president, that disagreed with what guests were saying about what the president was saying privately, but openly saying to each other, we have to keep this narrative up because it's good for ratings. That's a very different conversation. That one, I don't expect them, frankly, to have on the air because it's so damning to their entire political project. But at what point is there going to be any accountability? Look, I'm not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater. And frankly, I kind of agree with Jen Psaki there insofar as there's a part of me that almost feels bad for, if not Tucker Carlson, some of the other hosts, at least the ones that are being threatened with firing for saying an occasional true thing like, the election wasn't stolen, right? So at what point is there going to be any reckoning for what systems are in place at Fox News that are obviously undermining the ability of hosts who know better to speak their genuine truths? I mean, even in your anecdote that you just told, you said that the Fox host was told he couldn't talk about it and eventually was given the green light to say
because it's part of an ongoing lawsuit, that you can't talk about details of an ongoing lawsuit.
Okay. Well, that might mean that there is
a lawsuit that, if
confidence gap
successful, could
for
have
Fox
a major
voters.
impact on not just Fox, but a lot of media organizations being able to address difficult subjects.
I'm having a hard time kind of pivoting to the prospective harms of the speech constraints of a
lawsuit.
lawsuit. When right now, I'm trying to talk about the constraints that exist right now, absent a lawsuit, where the financial incentives of a media institution are what's driving news coverage. That is what I mean. Again, we haven't talked very much about the details of the text messages and emails that came out in Dominion. But what they keep saying over and over again is that they are afraid they're going to lose market share to more right-leaning shows like Newsmax. And the reason why there is this gap between the public and the private, even though privately they disagree with Donald Trump, even though that was accurate, it was accurate to want to push back against election denialism. It's not because some court told them they couldn't talk, or not because the FBI told them they couldn't say X, Y, and Z, which are important issues, but because even without that, as is too often the case in the United States of America, it's money and the influence of money and financial incentives that are constraining people's speech. And what do you do about that? Because that's a problem here today, regardless of the outcome of this lawsuit.
I'm not disagreeing with you on all that, but the lawsuit itself is going to be an example of that. Is going to be financial constraints placed on speech if it's successful, because they're going to pay a massive financial penalty from having invited on specific guests who said things that weren't true, and that would be very consequential and is a little bit worrying to me on free speech, even if there was some individual bad behavior.
So first of all, it's a defamation suit, is it not? So again, there are exceptions to free speech. They include defamation.
And that's what we're adjudicating here.
Right, but this isn't some like the First Amendment is. I'm not saying you're saying this. But this isn't like the First Amendment is crumbling around our shoulders because someone was rightly called out for defaming. So
as I've said on this show before, I think defamation law itself limits free speech in ways that are not.
Sure, but a good chunk of this audience, at least, was very excited about the defamation victories by people like the pirate, Johnny Depp, and all of this. So, this is not a First Amendment issue. If it's a defamation issue and that claim is being litigated
it's a little different because it's claims that other people made as guests when invited on the network.
Robby, you keep wanting to talk about the outcome of that lawsuit. And what I'm trying to tell you is right now there's a crisis at Fox News. With or without that lawsuit ever being filed, the lawsuit means we know about the crisis, but that crisis would exist with or without this lawsuit. Because with or without this lawsuit, Tucker Carlson, who's one of the most powerful figures in the news, was so cowed by the prospect of Fox News losing market share if he criticized Donald Trump that even he wouldn't criticize Donald Trump, and even now is kind of soft pedaling. Do you remember, just at was it CPAC or TPUSA? His conference within the last couple of months.
CPAC was a few weeks ago, but
he gave that speech where he was asked about his support for Donald Trump, and he gave the most prevaricating kind of middle ground answer.
I don't think that was at TPUS.
I think it was a little bit longer.
It was not at CPAC.
It wasn't at CPAC. It was a little bit longer ago, maybe a month or two ago at the end of last year. But that's the world we live in. So what does it mean for both Tucker Carlson as an anchor who wants to tell his truth, and for the viewers who trust in someone like Tucker Carlson, that they can't get their news without being filtered through this filter of we can't anger Trump?
Yeah, we can't. But look, I'm not pushing back on that, but I'm saying that is also what the lawsuit will bring about if we can't bring on interesting people because we're going to be sued out of existence.
I think the lawsuit is saying you can't defame a company and argue that it is rigging an election, which I think is an outcome that most people are okay with because they're not running around.
I'm saying we've had this experience having guests on, not really although we've had occasional disagreements, but not so much with our corporate masters, but with YouTube's own policies for what you can say with respect to COVID and other things, even having important conversations where I think we would have pushed back on what a guest had to say. Can we even do this because of the policies of the middleman, the moderation? So I worry about these things. I see it in that kind of sense as Fox is facing down this lawsuit. But I'm not trying to detract from the criticism you're bringing up.
That's fine. I just think at some point somebody has to talk seriously about what this means for Fox viewers. Because honestly, they're being victimized here, and it's the most popular news channel in America. And Tucker Carlson is like the most popular news show in America. And it does nobody a service if he is not being able to at least speak what his own personal truth is, as much as I often disagree with it.
Again, I think if they win the lawsuit, that's going to be much more exacerbated. But we'll have more Rising right after this. Stay tuned.